The first thing I noticed was how quiet the house had become. Not peaceful quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in after something has already gone wrong, and you just haven't figured out what yet. I was standing in the kitchen, still in my coat, keys in my hand. I'd just come back from the hospital. My older brother, Gerald, had been admitted 3 days earlier. A cardiac event, the doctors called it, which is what they say when they want to soften the word attack. He was stable. He was going to be okay. But those first 72 hours, I barely left that waiting room. I slept in a chair. I ate whatever my daughter-in-law brought me in a paper bag. My wife, Renee, had not come once. She said she was managing things at home. She said someone had to keep the household running. She said Gerald had never been particularly warm to her over the years, which was true, and I hadn't pushed back on it the way I should have. I was 63 years old, and I had been married to this woman for 21 years, and I had learned, or thought I had learned, which battles were worth fighting. So I came home that Thursday evening, expecting leftovers in the refrigerator, and maybe an awkward conversation about the hospital, about Gerald, about what came next. What I found instead was a house that felt wrong in a way I couldn't immediately name. I walked through the front hallway. The console table where Renee kept her keys, her sunglasses, the little ceramic dish her mother had painted, it was bare. I noticed that, but I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself I was tired. 3 days of a hospital waiting room will make a man see things that aren't there and miss things that are. I walked into the bedroom. Her closet was open. The left side, the one she'd always claimed as hers, was empty, not rearranged, not reorganized. Empty, the way a shelf looks after a store has closed for good. I stood there for what felt like a long time. Then I took my phone out of my pocket. There was a text from her. Sent at 11:47 that morning, while I was probably sitting next to Gerald watching some cable news program with the volume too low to actually hear. I've been unhappy for a long time. You've known that. I've decided to stop waiting for things to change. I'm going to be with someone who actually chooses me. I've already spoken to an attorney. Don't try to call. I read it twice. Then I set my phone face down on the nightstand and sat on the edge of the bed. I did not call her. Not because she told me not to, because I didn't know what I would say. After 21 years, I had thousands of things to say, and none of them felt like the right place to start. I sat there until the room went dark. I want to be honest about something. Renee and I had not been happy, not genuinely happy, for several years. I knew that. She knew it. I think we had both made a kind of unspoken agreement to keep the shape of the marriage even after the substance had thinned. We were polite to each other. We attended family functions together. We slept in the same bed and did not touch. I had told myself this was what long marriages looked like, that the warmth came and went like weather, and you didn't abandon the house just because it was cold outside for a season. I had been wrong about that, or at least I had been wrong to assume she agreed with me. But here is what I had not known, and what I would spend the next several weeks slowly uncovering. While I was sitting in a hospital waiting room praying my brother's heart would hold, Renee had been on the phone with her attorney. She had transferred $64,000 from our joint savings account into a private account in her name alone. She had arranged for things to be moved out of our house by a company her sister had hired. She had been planning this, her attorney would later confirm, for approximately 8 months. 8 months. I thought about what I had been doing for the last 8 months. Working. Visiting Gerald when his knees got bad and he couldn't drive himself to appointments. Fixing the gutter on the north side of the house that kept pulling away from the fascia. Going to bed at 10 and waking at 6 and doing it all again. I had not seen it coming. I want to be clear about that, not to excuse myself, but because I think it matters. Some people will read a story like this and say the man should have known, should have paid more attention, should have asked harder questions. Maybe, but I was 63 years old, and I trusted my wife. And I do not think trust is something a person should apologize for. My son, Patrick, came over the following morning. He's 34, lives about 20 minutes away, works in logistics. He's practical in the way I raised him to be. He doesn't panic. He makes lists. When I told him what had happened, he sat across the kitchen table from me and was quiet for a moment. Then he asked if I'd eaten anything. I said I hadn't. He got up and made eggs. We ate without talking for a while. Then he asked about the bank account. I told him what I'd found when I'd called the bank that morning. $64,000. Gone. The account had been joint, which meant she'd done nothing technically illegal in withdrawing it. But my attorney, a woman named Carol, who I'd used for a property matter years earlier, told me that in a divorce proceeding, unilaterally draining a joint account in anticipation of separation is considered dissipation of marital assets, and it was absolutely something we could pursue. Patrick listened to all of this. He asked a few questions. Then he said, "Dad, what do you need from me right now?" I thought about it. "Nothing," I said. "I just need to know you know." He nodded. He understood that. Renee's sister Connie called me 4 days after I found the empty closet. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Some old reflex of civility that 21 years of marriage had installed in me without my permission. Connie told me Renee was doing well. She said Renee had been struggling for a long time and that this was really the healthiest choice for both of us. She said she hoped we could handle this with dignity. I asked Connie where the $64,000 was. There was a pause. Connie said she wasn't really in a position to discuss the financial details, that I should talk to Renee's attorney. She said she hoped I wouldn't make this ugly. I told her I wasn't the one who had drained a bank account while my husband sat at his brother's bedside in a cardiac unit. Another pause. Then Connie said, "Renee said you'd frame it that way." I said, "Connie, I'm not framing anything. I'm describing what happened." She didn't have a response to that. We said goodbye, and I have not spoken to her since. The man's name, I found out later, was Douglas. He was 58, recently divorced himself, owned a landscaping company in Scottsdale. He and Renee had met at a conference Connie's husband had organized, some kind of regional business networking event, the kind of thing Renee used to attend and come home from and tell me was not worth the drive. I don't know how long it had been going on before the 8 months of planning. I asked Carol if it mattered from a legal standpoint, and she said it could matter in terms of financial misconduct if marital funds had been used, but that in our state, fault wasn't the primary driver of asset division. I didn't pursue it further. Not because it didn't hurt. It did, in the dull, specific way that I imagine amputation hurts after the initial shock has faded, a persistent ache where something used to be. But I had made a decision, somewhere in those first few days, that I was not going to let this become the kind of divorce where two people spend their remaining years feeding a legal machine that grinds both of them down equally. I wanted two things: my fair share of what we had built together and my life back. Carol said both were achievable. Gerald came home from the hospital 2 weeks after this started. I drove him myself, helped him get settled in his apartment, stocked his refrigerator with the things his cardiologist had approved. He's a stubborn man, my brother. He didn't ask too many questions about Renee. He'd never particularly trusted her, and he was decent enough not to say, "I told you so," to a man who'd just had his savings gutted. What he did say while I was putting soup in his refrigerator was, "You going to be all right?" I thought about it the same way I'd thought about Patrick's question. "Yes," I said. "Not right now, but yes." He nodded. Gerald has always understood that some answers are about the future and not the present. The financial picture, as Carol and a forensic accountant she brought in began to lay it out, was more complicated than I'd initially understood. The 64,000 was the most visible piece, but Renee had also, over the preceding 8 months, made a series of smaller transfers that totaled another 19,000. Some of it had gone to Connie, ostensibly as loans that had never been documented. Some of it appeared to have gone to Douglas, though tracing that thread took time. The marital home was in both our names. We'd paid off the mortgage 6 years earlier. The assessed value was just over 400,000. There was also a retirement account in my name, my 401k from 30 years of work, and a smaller IRA in hers. Carol advised me on how to approach the division in a way that protected the majority of my retirement without triggering unnecessary tax exposure. What I want to say about this part, the financial part, is that it was exhausting in a way that had nothing to do with the numbers themselves. Every document I signed, every phone call with Carol, every statement I had to gather and organize and send over, all of it was a reminder that 21 years of shared life was being disassembled, categorized, and assigned a dollar value. The camping trips we'd taken in the early years, the house we'd repainted together on a weekend when Patrick was 12, and he'd gotten more paint on himself than the walls. The way she used to leave the kitchen light on when she went to bed before me so I wouldn't come home to a dark house. None of that was in any of the documents. None of it counted toward anything. I don't say that to be sentimental. I say it because I think people who haven't been through it don't understand that the grief and the logistics happen simultaneously, and you don't get to do them in sequence. About 6 weeks in, I received a voicemail from Renee. I had respected her request not to call, not out of deference, but because Carol had advised me firmly that all communication should go through counsel. That advice had served me well, but Renee had apparently not received the same guidance, or had chosen to disregard it. Her voice on the voicemail sounded different from the woman I'd lived with. Lighter, somehow, but also, I don't know how else to describe it, thinner, like she was performing composure rather than possessing it. She said she hoped I wasn't going to let this become a war. She said she believed we could be reasonable adults. She said that what she had done with the savings was something she'd felt she had to do to protect herself, and she hoped I could understand that someday. I listened to the voicemail once. I forwarded it to Carol. Carol sent me back a 3-word reply. "This helps us." I did not listen to it again. Patrick took me to a baseball game that summer. His idea. He thought I needed to be somewhere loud for a few hours, somewhere where none of it followed me. He was right. We sat in the upper deck and ate bad food, and watched a game that went 11 innings, and I didn't think about divorce paperwork for approximately 4 hours, which at that point in my life felt like a genuine gift. Driving home, he asked me if I ever thought about what I was going to do with the house. I told him I hadn't decided yet. It was a lot of house for one person, but it was also the place where he'd grown up, where Gerald had come for every Thanksgiving for 30 years, where I knew exactly which floorboards creaked and exactly how long the hot water took to come up in the downstairs shower. He said, "You don't have to decide yet." I said, "I know." He said, "I'm proud of you, Dad, the way you've handled this." I didn't know what to say to that. I looked out the window for a moment. Then I said, "I haven't done anything special. I just didn't do the things I shouldn't do." He thought about that. "That's harder than it sounds," he said. He was right about that, too. The divorce was finalized 11 months after I came home to that empty closet. Here is what the settlement contained. I kept the house. Renee received a buyout of her equity share, which Carol had carefully structured to account for the dissipated funds, meaning the $64,000 and the additional $19,000 were factored into the calculation. What she ultimately walked away with was significantly less than she would have received had she not drained the account. Her attorney had apparently advised her that the transfers would be difficult to recover from, legally speaking. She had not listened. The loans to Connie were treated as marital funds improperly distributed. Connie was not required to repay them directly, but their value was deducted from Renee's share. I won't pretend the outcome was clean. No divorce outcome is clean. But I can tell you that I walked out of that process with my retirement intact, my house in my name, and the reasonable certainty that I had not behaved in a way I would later be ashamed of. In 11 months of genuine provocation, I had not sent a single angry message. I had not called her names to mutual friends. I had not shown up at her door. I had let Carol do the work, and Carol had done it well. Gerald came for Thanksgiving that November. Patrick and his wife came, and their 2 kids, my grandchildren, who are 7 and 4 and have no idea any of this happened, which is exactly how it should be. We ate at the same dining table I've had for 15 years, in the same house that now has only my name on the deed. And at some point in the evening, my 4-year-old granddaughter climbed into my lap and fell asleep while the adults were still talking. I sat there with her weight against my chest and thought about the year I'd just had. I thought about the waiting room at the cardiac unit, about the empty closet, about $64,000 in 21 years, and a woman who had once, a long time ago, laughed at something I'd said in a way that made me feel like the funniest man alive. I thought about all of it without bitterness. That surprised me, a little. I had expected bitterness. I had prepared for it, braced for it. But sitting there with my granddaughter asleep in my lap and my son's voice carrying across the room and Gerald arguing with Patrick's wife about something on the television, there was no room for it. The table was full. That was the thing. The table was full, and the house was still standing, and I was still here. A few months later, I ran into someone I knew slightly, a woman from my church, a widow who'd lost her husband about 3 years back. We'd always been friendly, the way you're friendly with someone you see once a week and have never spoken to outside of a specific context. She asked me how I was doing. I told her about the divorce, briefly, the way you do when someone asks, and you don't want to perform grief, but you don't want to lie either. She listened. She didn't say she was sorry, which I appreciated. What she said was, "That takes a lot of strength to go through that quietly." I told her it didn't feel like strength. It felt like the only available option. She smiled. "That's usually what strength feels like," she said. We talked for another 20 minutes. She'd been a bookkeeper for 30 years before she retired, which I found interesting, and she'd raised 2 daughters largely on her own after her first marriage ended in her 30s, which I found more interesting still. She was sharp and funny, and not at all impressed with herself. Her name is Margaret. We've had coffee twice since then, and I'm told by Patrick that this counts as dating, which I told him was a dramatic overstatement. Gerald, when I mentioned it to him, just nodded slowly and said, "About time." I'm telling you all of this because I think there's something worth saying about what happens when the life you built is suddenly not what you thought it was. You can try to burn the evidence. You can try to make the other person pay, not in court, but in the daily small cruelties that divorcing people sometimes inflict on each other. You can make it ugly. There are days when ugly is exactly what you feel. But I've lived 63 years. 64 now. And I know that the things you do in the worst moments are the things that stay with you. Not the things done to you, the things you do. My name is on the deed. My retirement is intact. My son is proud of me. My granddaughter falls asleep in my lap. Gerald is alive and arguing about sports on television. Renee is in Scottsdale with Douglas. I don't know if she's happy. I genuinely hope she is. But I know I'm okay. And for now, more than I expected, that is more than enough.